Welcome to Beyond the Current Situation with me, your host, Lily Sanders. So, this is our second episode of my new series that's really spinning off of my previous guest, Conor Crippen. Today, we have his mom and his dad. And just a quick backdrop, Conor Crippen, he's 29 years old now. 10 years ago, in 2013, he was hit by a drunken driver. He was a pedestrian. He was hit by a driver and wound up in the hospital, critical condition. He had life-threatening results. He overcame it. You're going to have to listen to that episode to hear how that goes. But today, we're going to talk about with his mom and dad and how that really affected them and how they navigated through it. Because Conor went through, he was in a coma for 3 weeks. He came out of the coma and had to basically start from ground zero with kind of rebuilding and relearning how to get all of the functionality back in so that all his living functions. So I'm going to bring in his parents, which are Kathleen and Phil Crippen. I am going to welcome them together right here. So please help me welcome them to the show. And I'm going to bring them on one at a time. Without further ado, welcome Kathleen and Phil. It's great to have you guys here. Kathleen, I'm going to start with you first. So, if you would, take us back to that, the night that you first got the call that Conor was in an accident.
Yes, a night, of course, that we will never forget. It had been a beautiful day that day. Phil and I actually spent the whole day together, just, doing errands, having a great Saturday, went out to dinner. And about 11 o'clock that night, I got a call on my cell phone, and it said that Conor was calling. So I picked up, and it was a person from the hospital in Chicago using his phone. Obviously, he found, he calls me Ma, so she called Ma. And told us that he had been hit by a car, that he was in extremely critical condition, that we needed to get there as soon as possible. And this was in Chicago. We live in Ohio, so it's about a 5-hour drive. And I was, we were sleeping, so I was very disoriented and first I thought he was in a car. And I said, well, I don't understand. He doesn't have a car there. She said, no, he's been hit by a car. So
what time was he hit?
In Chicago, well, I guess it was around 11 o'clock Chicago time. So we got the call about midnight.
PM? Okay.
PM. And his
he
friends
was walking 11 p.m. He got hit by a car while he was walking with someone else, correct?
Yes, with someone else. They were going back to the L station in Chicago. So he was on the designated crosswalk for that. And this, person, a drunk driver, hit him. He flew 15 feet and then landed. We like to say that he didn't break a bone or chip a tooth in that fall. He didn't, injure anything else except his brain, and as badly as a brain could be injured. So Phil and I made it to Chicago. It's normally a 5-hour drive. I really think that night it was about 3.5 hours. We made it there.
Oh my goodness.
So, yeah.
The first thing that comes to my mind, and my listeners know this is always an organic conversation. I don't plan questions or anything. And just hearing what you just told me, if this makes you feel any better, in 2011, less than a year after I ran for my own life and I was now a single mom, divorced mom, or waiting for my divorce to happen. My very best girlfriend in the whole wide world was killed riding her bicycle, 8 a.m. in the bike lane,
Yeah.
in the suburbs with the helmet, the wristband, everything. And she was thrown. And literally the person in the house heard the helmet
Oh,
hit her driveway, and she was dead on arrival.
oh,
And they said if she had lived, she would have been a vegetable. But
yeah.
I'm just thinking of that now, and time never really makes you forget anything ever. I say that all the time, like that saying, like, oh, time heals all wounds.
Right.
Yeah, we heal, and we forget. Of course, we don't think about it all the time. But when something like a story like yours and Phil's and Connor's and your whole family comes up, it does bring me back to that. It brings me back to that, and so it's what it tells me is that there was a reason, why Conor is still here, why you guys are all telling this story. Thank God that he's recovered. Now, Conor, when I had him on my podcast, he told me um in a previous podcast with me, my podcast, he told me that he was a mama's boy. So, uh, so that said, what went through your mind when you first got this call?
Well, you're going to think that I'm crazy, and I still can't believe it myself. But when I first got the call, my first thought was, oh, this is how Conor's going to make a difference. Conor and I have always been very close, and we've always had very deep, soulful conversations when he was 15, 16, 17 years old. Um, you know, we weren't talking about silly stuff in the car. We were talking about, life and things that mattered. And it was always so important for Conor to have a purpose in life. And, he thought it was going to be in a grandiose way, to reach, lots of people. And maybe it still is. But he was always searching for how he was going to do that. He was majoring in neurology. Well, he had biochemistry major, wanted to be a neurologist.
Yeah, we talked
And
about the irony of that, by the way.
yes, and he always um, just needed to make a difference in the world. And so when I first got this call, that was my first thought. Oh,
That's
this
so
is the path.
interesting. And I want to encourage all of our listeners to, if you haven't heard my podcast with Conor, I want you to listen to that after this podcast, because Conor, when I asked him what went through his mind in that millisecond of the accident, remember, he's the victim of what happened, and you're the reciprocant of, as the mom. He said that he felt, um, it felt like almost a hug. But what was really interesting was that he also said that my mom, I actually wrote it down. My mom, who is my twin, he said. And so everything that I see is my mom.
Oh, wow.
Now, as a mom, um, I resonate with that, because I wrote in my book, Truth to Triumph, I felt like everything that I see and feel, I feel like my son feels. And very much like I mentioned, I kind of referred to it. I didn't say the word twin flame in my book, but I said that to Conor. So I definitely understand how he feels. Is that how you feel?
Yeah, we just have always kind of got each other. And I felt that my greatest role, those first few weeks, really months, when Conor wasn't able to express himself or show himself or let people get to know him, I took my role very seriously, that I needed to let the world know who Conor is. And that really translated with all his caretakers. Um, all of a sudden, this personality that, or I would tell stories about Conor, or I would, you know, just always be talking about him. And I really believe that made a difference in how they cared for him. We are still very good friends with all of his nurses and doctors and that we had in Chicago, because and you'll see when you talk to our kids later, but all those people saw us in the most vulnerable time of our lives, and they shared that time with us, and we shared it with them, and they knew Conor. Conor was not responsive in any way, but you know what, they knew him. And that was what I felt strongly I needed to do. And I think that's because we've just always been so connected, that I
Mm,
knew the world needed to know him even when he had lost his voice.
mm, I understand. Now,
Yeah.
for our listeners, let's assume they didn't hear the podcast before this with Conor. So I want to kind of pause and back up a little bit. Okay. So Conor's in this accident. He winds up in the hospital. He was in university in Loyola,
Mm-hmm.
Chicago, which coincidentally, my nephew was a professor there.
Oh.
And yeah. And so he's a doctor and professor there. And so he gets hit outside of the university
Mm-hmm.
somewhere by, like you said, the L train. He's in the hospital. You get the call, you and dad, you and your husband, you get there within, 2/3 of the time that it would normally take you. You're at the hospital. Now, the doctors give you very little hope for
Mm-hmm.
Conor's survival.
Mm-hmm.
Kathleen, if you were to pick one of the many emotions that you felt, which one was the strongest?
Um, my belief that he would overcome this. Um,
Beautiful. I want to hold that thought. I would like to. These are the photos are to me, images are worth 1,000 words. I want to put up a photo of Conor when he was in the hospital. Why am I not seeing this? I don't know. Let's close this again. And I'd like you to take a look at it. While I'm doing that, that first visual of seeing your son,
mm-hmm.
um, what, aside from you saying that you knew, what did you think exactly? What was that strongest emotion?
That he would overcome this against all odds.
So now he'll overcome this. You knew
Mm-hmm.
he was going to overcome. You knew that you knew that you knew. But now we're looking at this visual, this image of the son that you gave birth to.
Yeah.
Is there
And
any
that's
kind
what we
of,
walked into. Mm-hmm.
mhm. Was there any fear?
Um, I think when you talk to Phil, I think he felt a lot of fear.
Hmm.
I refused to have fear.
Hmm.
Absolutely refused it. I was so happy to be there
Hmm.
when we finally got there. And honestly, I don't think I left his side for weeks.
Hmm.
And sometimes I wish I could go back to having that stalwart faith that I had.
Yeah.
But for the first, 3 months, 3, 4, 5 months, um, somehow I would not allow myself any other emotion except problem solving and love and
Hmm.
seeing Conor through this.
Mm.
We wouldn't even talk about the drunk driver. We wanted no part of that.
Good for
We
you.
wanted the only energy in Conor's room to be energy of love and recovery.
Hmm.
And so we just couldn't even hold on to anger or uh, any other negative emotion for that matter. There was
Hmm.
no space for it. He was that critical. Um, he was about as critical as you could be and still have a pulse, I guess.
Hmm. Hmm. Got it. And so, um, it's interesting. I want to, I want to ask you, you said that Phil, your husband, who is actually patiently here in the room with us. And so I want to bring you on, Phil. So if you could unmute yourself,
Yep.
and I want you to come in, I want to bring you into the conversation.
Okay.
A- As the father, and welcome, by the way,
Thank you. Glad to be here.
as the father, the man of the household, what's the first thing that went through your mind when you realized your middle child had very little hope to live?
Yeah, it was Kathy, as Kathy said, it was so late at night that it took a little while to actually comprehend this was real.
Hmm.
Um and almost thinking, all right, maybe they have it wrong, or maybe he's appearing that way, but he's going to be fine pretty quickly. And so I think probably for me it was more denial that okay, this really isn't happening, even though we were, we grabbed the clothes on our back and just got in the car and started driving, and drove as fast as we could. But it was just really trying to wrap your head around this, right? Because it's just we had I think a very blessed life, and everything was great, right? Our kids were all healthy, they were all doing well and successful and things. And so it was like, well, this shouldn't be happening, right? Because
Right.
this is not the path I thought we were going to be on as a family, and especially for Conor, what he was going to be doing. So it was really very hard to actually comprehend. I think getting to the hospital, and walking in and seeing that picture was tough.
Yeah. Yeah. Um,
So
did look, I mean, we're wired differently than men, right? And so did you sense a feeling of helplessness? I mean, we all know that usually you feel like, you have to take care of things and
right.
right. And so did you have a feeling of helplessness?
I did a little bit, and really, because when you see Connor's there were so many tubes,
Oh,
and
tell me about. So here you are. I'm going to ask you the same question I asked Kathleen is, so now you see this image of this child, your middle son. You
right.
you see him all wired up and what's going through your mind?
Well, it was really funny because actually, even going back and looking at that picture, we had just talked to Connor that morning, um, and so his eyes were black and blue.
I say,
But
yeah.
as Kathy said, yeah, nothing else was broken or noticeable, right? So it almost looked like he could wake up at any moment and just start talking, right? Because everything else to me looked like Connor. but obviously it was his brain that we could not see, and we could not see the damage and feel it. So yeah, it was, so it was a little surreal to realize how badly he was hurt. And I think, as Kathy said, and I'll fully admit this, I took the lead from Kathy, because I had more fear. I was more concerned that he wasn't going to make it than knowing that he was, right. And it took me a little while to kind of get that faith that we're going to make this work, and he's going to be okay somehow.
Yeah, that's the
Um,
beauty of that yin and yang, that masculine versus feminine. You can have that magnetic part of someone, and then you got to have the action person, someone that, like, that's how it works. Thank goodness that
right.
that kicked in. And I always believe that that's innate. Masculine is masculine, feminine is feminine, no matter how much, how high or low those hormones are. It's, that's really innate. So I was going to ask you, so how did you hold yourself together?
Um, I do think, because our son and daughter came up later that day. So it was a Saturday night of his accident. They came up later on Sunday. And so I think you're right. Just being a parent, you had to be strong for them, because they were going to take it very hard. I mean, they already were, but then knowing that when they see him, that's going to be really difficult. Um, and so I think you just kind of prop yourself up and say, this is the role I need to play right now, is to be a father and helping to support them, and you know um, try to instill confidence in them that things are going to be okay. All right. So I think especially when they came up, I had to switch to that role.
Yeah.
Right. And then, besides them coming up, then I think I went into kind of my mode of, okay, we're going to be here for a while. Where are we going to stay? We need to get clothes. We don't have clothes. We need to, so starting to think about the logistics of it, to say, okay, I know Kathy wants to spend 100% of her energy. She rarely left the room, Conor's room. And so it was like, okay, I got to take care of everything else so that this could be possible, right? Our
Yeah.
our son Jack was a sophomore in high school, right?
Oh my
He's in the
goodness.
middle of his semester, right? And so he's in school, and he's trying to, and he admired his brother so much, and so we knew that was going to be hard for him. So how do we figure that out? So it was really, that's the role I felt like I had to take at that point, was just trying to figure out, okay, let me try to figure out everything else, um, so that Kathy could spend her full time, being the caretaker, and then, you know once I had that kind of stuff done, I could come in and, be there as well with Connor, and be supportive and talking to the doctors, and things like that. So,
Yeah.
um,
Thank you for that. Let me back up to what you said a little earlier. So here you are, um, concerned also about how the other siblings are going to digest this,
yeah,
just at the initial even sight of it. And so you see the children, your other two children, experience this. What went through your mind then?
it was hard. Yeah, because I tell you, it was, so our son Jack was actually home with us when we got the call. Um, and he had just come from a dance that night, right? And had, a great time, and it was fun. And so, we had to grab him and say, look, your brother's been hit by a car. He's in very bad condition. You need to go to Kathy's sister, who lived pretty close to us. Um, and so I think it was, just trying to make sure he was okay to get there.
Yeah.
Um, and then, having to call our daughter, to let her know. And she had a really close relationship with Connor, knowing that this would be very traumatic for her. Um, so again, I think it was really just trying to be as strong as I could, right? When they showed up at the hospital, I met them at the front door, and just gave them a hug and said, "Look, this is going to be tough. It's not great."
Oh
Um,
gosh.
but they were both anxious just to get up, just to be with Connor and just to see him. Um, and so, yeah, that's what we did. And so, again, I just tried to be the best I could for them,
Mm,
to be supportive and, um, you know, understand where they're coming from at that moment.
hmm. And when did you break down?
um, about every hour. As you
Hmm.
can tell, I do have Irish genes, so I cry a little bit.
That's good. That's
I
healthy.
yeah, it is healthy. I tell you what was an advantage, because as Kathy said, we wanted to keep the energy very positive in that room.
Hmm.
Uh, and so right down the hallway, so he's in the ICU, right down the hallway, there was a little waiting room. So literally probably every hour, 2 hours, I would go in there, cry, and then get myself together and then come back out.
Oh
Um,
my gosh.
and
Oh,
it was just, because especially those first couple of days, it was calling people, calling my dad, calling my family, um,
the
calling
logistics
people
of it.
at my
Yeah.
work.
Mm.
Yeah, at work, like, hey, I'm not going to be in for a while, right? And having to tell people, it was hard to share that,
Hmm.
and just having to keep making those calls and things like that. So,
Hmm.
yeah, that room was my sanctuary for a while,
Yeah.
to be able to go in, be alone, and just, let my emotions go, and then come
Yeah.
back in, you know, keep
Yeah.
going with the doctors and trying to make sure we were doing the best thing for Connor.
Got it. Now, let's say moving forward just a little bit and okay, now the doctors are have you at point B in realization of what's going on and what really needs to be done for Connor in order to kind of relearn things. And was there ever a moment that you can honestly, and I'm going to say painfully, feel that you had no control over the outcome for Connor?
Yeah, I'll tell you, there was, um, a moment when he had opened his eyes, the pressure within his brain, had finally gone down, and that took those 2 or 3 weeks. But really, that brain pressure was just terrible for him, and so it was always painful to realize the doctors were doing as much as they could, but they were having a hard time keeping it under control.
Mm.
Um, but then finally, when he got to the point where they're like, "Hey, he needs to go to rehab or move on," right? Um, so we went to it was called the Rehabilitation Institute of Chicago,
Hmm.
and so Kathy and I went to tour, to see it, because it's a great rehabilitation, one of the best really in the world. And so we were lucky enough to be able to get in and get a spot. So going there, and we just wanted to do a tour, to just see what it looks like, right?
Hmm.
And I think at that point, when Connor, he was still non-responsive, um, had a very blank look on his face, barely moving. But I felt like, okay, we're going to go to rehab, things are going to start to kick in. He was a great athlete, so I'm like, okay, the physical part's going to be easy. He's going to be walking in a week and be moving and all that. And when we went there then, and we toured it, and we saw the other brain injured, patients that were there, it was a shock to me, because a lot of them were not in great shape. And I think that was, again, kind of a gut punch of, oh, wow, this is not going to be easy. There are no guarantees. Um, and I would say the drive back from that location was probably the lowest I felt the whole time.
Oh my
Um,
goodness. I
I just
can't
wasn't
even
sure.
imagine. I can't even imagine as a mom, a parent. Uh,
Yeah.
no words. And that's just thank you for that. Um, I want to now then on the heels of that, I want to ask you again, it's another personal question, but so how would you describe the way you suffered?
How would I describe the way I suffered? I think um, I do keep a lot of stuff in, so I think I did keep some of it in. Even though I would say during that time frame, I think Kathy and I mean, we had been married for 20 plus years already, and it was amazing how we just came together and really gelled together. And I
Mm-hmm.
think we were able to share our emotions.
Mm-hmm.
But there were times I honestly tried to compartmentalize and just put my emotions away. I would have my moments, but then I would collect myself and just get back to the business at hand.
Mm-hmm.
And I think at
The
that time,
business at hand. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, at that time there was always things to be doing. He was in rehab, and he had a feeding tube, and so we had to make sure he was fed regularly. Um, just doing all those kinds of things, trying to make sure he was comfortable, all that. So there was um, they were in some ways long days, but they were short days because they were busy. There was always stuff going on.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was really about, okay, we got these tasks to accomplish to try to help move him ahead. So let's focus in on that, right?
Mm.
And so,
Mm-hmm. Which
for me,
the action and that movement of doing it kind of is it does play a really significant role in getting through a very adverse situation.
right,
So that was a good thing. I'm going to say that that's a blessing that you were able to compartmentalize that until you were ready to, and use your hourly breakdowns. That's a really good thing. I want to come back to you on that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring Kathleen back in. I'm going to
okay,
ask you to mute. And Kathleen, I want to ask you, I want to take it from how you felt when you were at that rehab, just checking it out, you and Phil, and you saw all of these other patients, if you will, that were really not in a situation that obviously you didn't want your son to be in. Um, what was the very first thing? Um, or should I say, what was your brutally honest internal dialogue at that image at the rehab place?
Yeah, well, Phil's right. That day we went to tour it was the worst day. And it was the reality that this is our life now. And it's a roller coaster, and at that point at the ICU, he had his eyes open, and this family that we had created, and it was safe there, and leaving that space of love and going somewhere where they didn't know Conor, where it was extremely scary.
Yeah.
There was a moment, Phil and my sister, so I was never alone in Chicago. They would always tag team it, and we talk on Highway 65 as Phil was coming up and my sister was going home to get the update or whatever. So that day we moved to RIC. It was a transition day, and I actually was by myself that day. And I mean, it was just hell. Conor, he couldn't regulate his temperature, the movement from the ambulance from the hospital to RIC. He was getting sick, and he was sweating and extremely uncomfortable. And, we moved there. I don't know anybody, nobody knows Conor's story. I mean, at the hospital, Conor was their hero because he had survived. They named the room, the ICU room, after him. That's Conor's room. And, and then here we are amongst strangers, and he's doing terrible, and he looked terrible. And sitting in that room, and it was just like, what is this part of the journey going to bring?
Yeah. So now you were used to all of that love and support, and you were really just kind of in that space where this is where we're at. And then all of a sudden now the realization of, okay, now it's the next level, the next stage.
Yeah.
And it's not familiar. In fact, it's completely foreign.
Yeah.
New people, new situation, a new mountain to climb, right?
Yeah.
Who did you cry out to? Whether it was internally, whether it was your internal dialogue or out loud.
My mom has passed away. I spoke to my mom constantly.
Okay. At that moment, did you?
It was, no, not at that moment. That was such a lonely, awful moment. I don't even think I don't even think I could cry out for help at that. I think I was just, my eyes were open to this world that I had never known existed, this brain injury world.
That's so ironic because it almost explains the blankness in Connor's eyes while he was
Yeah,
lying there.
that's exactly right. And I think I had that. I was empty and I was scared and I didn't know what to expect and I didn't know how to create a healing place for him. And so it was, and Phil alluded to this, the moment we got there, they said, look, you guys are part of taking care of him. You'll change his feeding tube. You'll you'll take his temperature and regulate, you'll take him to the bathroom, you'll shower him, you'll do all this. So it was like, so then I was like, okay, so I'm not going to sit there and watch the nurses take care of him, his trach and whatever. Okay, I can do this. This is something I can do. I can learn this. So I did. I busied myself with all the things, and he needed a lot of care.
So you're in
And
the doing on your end. Phil is in the doing on his end. What's
yeah.
really, really interesting is the two parallels between the conversation that I had with Conor and the conversation we're having now around the concept of the eyes. I have this conversation. It's so weird. This conversation seems to be following me. But there's an interesting concept of I was trying to explain to Conor when we had the conversation. He was talking about the eyes being so important and the windows to the soul. And I was attempting to take him a step beyond that and thinking from the perspective of someone who is physically blind. And because as a coach, many times a huge part of my approach with a client is having them attack anything in life, their business, actually doing as a blind person would. Because when you can become that realized and that enlightened and that consciously present, you move through life and any life situation through a completely different lens. And that is, my friends, what I call moving through the lens of the soul. Right. Now that does kind of parallel with what Conor was saying how he says that's one kind of tool is the eye therapy, but it's so much even more beyond that. So
Absolutely.
what do you think about what I just told you?
Um, that's a fascinating take on it. And I think it's very true. You know, one of his therapists early on said, you know, the process of healing the brain, your world is so small in the beginning. And then as you heal, your world opens up.
Mhm.
And so, I mean, I refer to Conor being an infant during that time. He mimicked an infant completely. It was that involuntary movements of his arms and legs,
Mhm.
restlessness.
Yeah. He said
You
he
know,
didn't even know how to swallow.
no,
Yeah.
couldn't hold that up. It
Yeah.
took 2 weeks for him to for them to work on him holding his head up.
Yeah.
We had a meeting after the first initial evaluation with his team and doctors and therapists who were going to work with him.
At the
And
rehabilitation center.
yes, and I knew it wasn't going to go very good.
Why?
I knew they were going to tell us things that I didn't want to hear. um, and so Phil had called in, so he was on speaker, and our daughter Bridget was with us that day, was with me that day. And, you know, the prognosis was, you're never going to be able to leave him alone. Um, you know, he won't be able to process or think. If the house catches on fire, he wouldn't even know what to do, or know that it was a dangerous situation. Which is very interesting. Fast forward 5 years later, our house was struck by lightning and it didn't burn down. And Conor was home and he was the first one who got the dogs in the car. And he was the first one out of the house. So
Oh,
he
God
knew
bless.
what to do.
Beautiful.
But anyway, so I let them all tell me how sick he was and how, you know, it did not look good. And I was prepared and I said, well, okay, well, thank you very much. But I'm going to show you all a video of when Conor ran in a state track meet that he made. And I'm also going to pass out a paper that he had just written for college. It was called Yahweh Symphony. It was about how we're all connected and faith and trust in the universe. And I said, you've seen him physically, you've seen him intellectually. So this is Conor, and he can do more than you think.
Oh, I love
And
that.
I saw it that very day. He had physical therapy right after that. And his physical therapist, Joe, who we learned to love, he expected more from Conor that day. I saw it happen. And I saw it with his language with Conor. I saw how he motivated Conor, and it transferred.
Yeah.
So
I I firmly believe that God handpicks people in our lives, and
yeah,
going right down to that first physical or occupational or whatever that's called, therapist,
yeah,
and he was divinely appointed to take care
yeah,
of your son.
yeah, yeah.
Mm.
And they
I,
believed in him more. Yeah.
yeah, I love that I love that you challenged um the I'm gonna say the conditioned mind. In other words, that the global belief that sometimes doctors will put on us. And
Mhm.
I don't disrespect doctors, right? We need
No.
doctors in the world, right? I don't disrespect. I mean, no disrespect, but we truly need to come to a space
Mhm.
where, and we've been trying to do this for the last goodness 30 years. I want to say, I hate to date myself, but about 45 years. I remember when I was 15 and learning how Eastern medicine is trying to meet up with Western medicine and what that all looks like, right? And but my point is, I believe it's Stephen Covey. I don't know if you're familiar with this author, and he says, don't don't deny the prognosis, or is it don't deny the diagnosis, but defy the prognosis.
Yeah.
And I actually applied that to my own life. And that is a very powerful sentence. And I to me, it's lighting up my whole head and my brain and my heart when it comes to thinking about people like your son and
Yeah.
you and Phil,
Mhm.
really defying that and really pushing through that and saying, I'm not even putting that in my space because all things are possible. Does that ring true to you, Phil?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's a great way to put it. Absolutely.
Wonderful. I want to circle back to you, Kathleen, but I want to go to Conor, to Phil right now. Phil, I want to ask you a question. Um, eh, eh, Having said what I just said, did you honestly believe that it would happen? And when I say it would happen, that he would defy the prognosis?
Yeah, because I tell you what, especially when we got to the rehab center, um, in conversations with the doctors in the ICU,
Hmm.
I really came to understand that it was a miracle where he was.
Mm.
Um, so for me, then I was like, okay, this is going to happen, right? He is going to be okay. And I think, the faith Kathy had, and again, just knowing Connor and knowing that he did want to change the world in some way. I think at that point I did realize this, okay, this is how he's going to do it. He's going to come back from this, and he's going to share a message of hope, a message of strength and persistence and undenied faith
Mm.
in the future. So I really knew it was going to work, right? And even though he had some struggles at the rehabilitation center, and it took longer than we thought, we just kind of knew, I knew he was going to get there, right?
Hmm.
I honestly actually met with the people at Loyola University. So this was probably end of May, beginning of June. I met with them and signed him up for the next semester because
Oh, I love that. I love
I
that.
just thought he's going to be fine. He's going to be fine. So we'll just get him back into school. And they were great. They were like, oh, sure. We'll just, unfortunately, he didn't complete the classes from last semester. We'll just re-sign him up for the same classes and all that. And I'm like, terrific. Right. We'll plan on it. His roommate, who was his best friend, we told him, yeah, get the apartment you're going to get. Connor's going to be there with you, so get the 2 bedroom because you're going to, you're both going to be there together. We just had this faith that it was going to happen,
I
right? And we
love
were
that.
putting
And
things in place to make it happen.
yeah, that kind of tells me that you don't believe in fate, but on the uh, as opposed to the fate, you actually you put it out there further as a manifestation that he will come back in and function and do this and do that. And instead of like, well, this is the hand life served me, which makes me crazy, by the way. So does that
Yeah,
sound right? Like you don't believe in, you just don't throw things on the wall and see what the world's going to give you, right? Or what fate gives you, right?
right. Well, I think one of the things too, like Kathy was saying, we never went on like to Google and looked up brain injury and looked up what the prognosis is and what the challenges are going to be and all that kind of stuff. We just kind of said, look, he's going to be okay.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we have a great family around us, so a lot of support, that we're just going to make this happen. And so, even when like those doctors, at first who said this is not going to be good, they were talking to us about getting a conversion van so that the wheelchair we could wheel him up and all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, you know what, he's not going to need that. We're not going to
Mm-hmm.
need that kind of stuff. I just know it. He's not walking right now, but I know he's going to be walking, right? I know he's going to get back. And so they would tell us that. And, you know, most of the time you listen, you say thank you, they go on, you're like, yeah, whatever. Or we're not listening, you know, to that person. And, you know, there were times people would come in and say stuff and honestly would I'd have to leave the room because I'm like, I'm not going to listen to this crap
Yeah, it'd
anymore.
make
You
you
know,
angry. You don't even want it in your
yeah, it
space
makes you
or in
angry.
your
It's
head.
just like, look, you have no idea who he is. So, you know, we're going to go with the plan that we have and the faith that we have. Um, and
I
really
love that.
I don't know what the right term is, but we knew it was going to happen. It was destiny, I guess, maybe. And so we knew it was going to happen. So we just said, hey, we just got to put our head down and keep driving towards that goal.
I mean, the right word is trust and knowing. Yeah, that's it. You just trusting and knowing that, you know,
Right,
what is not going to happen for sure. Right.
right,
And
right.
I'm not going to ask you, did it affect? Obviously, it affected a good, bad, or indifferent. But so, how did this affect your marriage during that time while you were in it?
Yeah. Um, I think I mentioned it before. I think um, that really propelled our marriage to another level.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and I think we were true partners. We were true, um, we were like one, and we were working together. And really, I think it, you know, it's funny. I know situations like that can cause a lot of challenges for people from a marriage perspective,
Mm-hmm.
because there is so much stress and things, but it actually made our marriage better.
It
And
strengthened
I
your
know that's a
marriage.
weird
I,
thing,
I, I,
right?
I can see that. How
Yeah.
was it on a scale from 1 to 10 before the accident? Different. No, the strength as far as um, communication and teamwork before the accident. Level of one
Um,
to 10, 10 being kumbaya, we communicate and we're a team and we do everything together.
right. Uh, I think honestly, we were at like a 6 or 7,
And then after the
right?
accident,
Five. Gotta say 5. Okay. But
Kathy
after the
saying a
accident,
five. Kathy, you're saying a five.
she said a 5. Yeah.
Okay.
But I will tell you, I think after the accident, you know, we're we're at 9 or 10. I
Mhm.
mean, we're there. Our relationship is different. Things
How?
we used to argue about,
Hmm.
you realize are so petty,
Yeah.
that it didn't matter, right? Because it was like, going into battle together, we realized, okay, we only got one goal, and that's to save our son, save our family. Um, and so it kind of just gels you together immediately, right? That all of a sudden, all that stuff that probably we were arguing about 2 days before the accident, completely forgotten, just gone, didn't matter. We'll work through it. And we had like a single goal.
Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, I would say I've never felt more connected to Kathy than during that time.
Mm. Um, yeah, it makes me want to cry just thinking about it. And don't you, isn't it entirely possible that um that's a huge blessing that came out of such an adverse situation like this?
Yeah, we've actually talked about. We wonder where we would be from a marriage standpoint, right?
Yeah. And where do you think you'd be from a marriage standpoint? There's a lot of there's a lot of couples that, yeah, they don't really fight, but they grow like further and further apart when all three kids are off. They've all
Right,
flown the nest, right? It's like, all right, what do we have left? And many times, 50% of the time, they split. Do you ever
right.
wonder about that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
honestly, we did. I mean, I think we talked about that, and you know, like I said, our so Connor was out of the house, Bridget was out of the house, and we had Jack, and I admit at times it was a little scary thinking, oh my gosh, it's just going to be the two of us, you know, pretty soon.
Yeah. Empty
Um,
nesters.
and how's that going to go, right? Because you know we're having arguments and some challenges now, but um, yeah, I do think about that, and I do think, you know, in a funny way how a tragedy can bring you together and actually change the course of our lives, and where we have gone as a couple. And so now, obviously we cherish our moments together, right? When it's just the
That's
two of
beautiful.
us, and just
So
being able to
beautiful.
be together. Yeah.
Yeah, I would think especially now. You're so
Yes.
busy taking care of every single thing, right? And um, I'm going to ask you a question before I go to Kathleen. I want to ask you a question
Mhm.
as as a man, as the father, um, i- given everything you just said,
Mhm.
how heavy is that burden now? Because I know you had that burden then during his recovery. How heavy is that burden now financially, and how much of that matters after all is said and done?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I don't even think I want to count how much money we've spent on Connor's recovery. Um, but honestly, we both did it, because we knew it was the right thing to do, and so it doesn't matter from that perspective. I will tell you, I think that the heaviness now, or the things that I think about, is that as we get older, um, you know, we work with Connor a lot, and can provide support financially and emotionally, and things like that. I I do worry about, and start to already think about, what's going to happen when Kathy and I are gone, right? He's
Oh,
he's still going to
wow.
be a
Yeah.
young physical person, and so even just thinking about the long term, and the impact of, how do I make sure he's okay, right? That he can afford to live, that he can, you know, um, take care of himself, right? And he lives on his own and does a lot of things on his own, but it's just wanting to make sure that he's set in the future. So that's the things that I think about from,
That's such a
I guess, from a
compassionate heart. That's such a compassionate and thoughtful response, because most people in our age range are fixated on, how am I going to survive as a retired
Mhm.
person, or how are we going to survive as a retired couple? And that's not even in any of your sentences. Instead, it's, how will our children survive, or how will Connor, like, who will take care of Connor if something, when I'm gone, when we're gone. And
Right.
I have to really honor you and applaud you for that. And um it it's just, it just highlights your heart, and I appreciate that. I really do. I want to actually now ask that same question to Kathleen. Kathleen, when you think about all of the um, unmentionable amount of dollars that have gone into um, supporting the recovery of Connor, and even him currently making his lifestyle more comfortable and helping him grow more and more and heal more and more. How much of that weighs in on your worries today as far as finances?
Um, well, for sure, it definitely weighs significantly. Um, and unfortunately, every avenue of recovery for Connor, none of it has been covered by insurance. Traditional medicine, traditional neurology, um, we have found that it just doesn't, for a person with a traumatic brain injury, it doesn't take them to a level of functionality in the world that we consider to be functional.
I couldn't
You
agree
know,
more. Yeah.
can they dress themselves? Can they, can they bathe themselves? Well, that's all fine and good, but there's more to tap into. And there's very little example of that in the world. We're constantly researching, we're constantly looking, and recovery from brain injury is there's a ceiling on it.
Mhm.
And so, so because of that, everything we've sought out has been financially very expensive.
Mhm.
It's been very valuable and it's been very effective, but it's been very expensive. And so it's significant. And, I was always one when our kids were growing up that it was very important for me to be very even with all of our kids. They got the same number of Christmas presents. If one person was, got in trouble, they all were affected. They all had some kind of consequence, because it takes two to tango, so to speak. And so I think our justification for spending all this money is we are going to do everything we can so that Bridget and Jack, they don't have to deal, what they have to deal with is very minimal.
Yeah,
If we
like
would have stopped years ago with therapies, it was high maintenance to take care of Conor. And
mhm.
I just thought, this cannot fall upon Bridget and Jack. It just cannot.
Yeah, yeah. And I kind of hear in the essence even of what Phil was saying and you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, it also almost sounds like the two of you want to make sure that the wholeness is also, I hate to use the word wholeness, but you like this forced responsibility is not left upon Bridget and Jack and holding them back from their purpose in life.
Yeah.
Right. Does that make sense? I'm trying to be really sensitive. I don't mean this in a mean way, but
No,
that's
but
what I'm
that's
feeling
been
in.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's been our motivation.
Yeah. Because Phil said when he worries about what will happen to them when we're gone. And that's a very, very compassionate statement. Yeah.
Just like you talked about our marriage, really,
How did it
us
affect it for you?
more. I mean, it's happened for both Bridget and Jack as well. They're both in careers where I'm not sure they would have got there without the experience of Conor. And they're both very successful in their careers, and they do very, care for people. But I know that's because of seeing their beloved brother go through this. And
Yes.
so there's
That's why they're
definitely,
in the next episode.
yeah, I know,
Because
which
I
is
knew
why,
without knowing. And we never even met, but I knew. I said, if you trust me,
yeah.
I'd like to bring all this dive deep. Yeah, I love what you're saying. And so from your perspective, then I'm going to ask you, I'm going to shift. I'm hearing you already tell me without telling me that you're kind of in agreement to how it changed or affected your marriage, not that it was in a bad place, but now where you are now. Is that right? You're in a different level. So let me ask you a question. How did it affect you while you were going through this recovery, this past 10 years from ground zero up? How did it affect you then as a mother?
Gosh, in every way possible. Honestly, this is what I would say. I think it validated me more as a mother. It validated that we would leave no stone unturned to get Conor every possible resource that would advance him forward. It validated my love and not having anything in the way of taking care of my children and what needs to be done. I mean, honestly, I believe it really did bring out the best in me as a mother, because I was so faithful and assured and problem solver. I mean, 10 years out, I'm not that same person anymore. I have I'm not nearly that stalwart or that strong. I have my soft moments, and I have my doubting moments, and I have lots of moments now that I never had then. So I really think I was the best essence of who I could be.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
And I think it mattered. I do.
Oh, I'm no doubt.
Yeah,
Did you feel or did you recognize that you were much more present as a mom?
absolutely. Absolutely.
There comes a point where, the dirty clothes on the floor and the things under the bed and, not doing
Yeah.
this or that. It comes a time where you realize that what really matters, none of that shit really mattered in the first place, right?
Mhm. 100%.
Just like in a
Absolutely.
marriage, the same thing. Who
Yeah.
cares?
Yes. That's what
Yeah.
it was. I was talking a lot on the phone with Bridget and Jack, and they would come up as much as they could to Chicago.
Mhm.
Um, and if I could sneak out and have lunch with Jack, just 16-year-old Jack, who
Oh my goodness.
found out
Ugh.
way too quickly that life is hard and scary, and just rocked his world. It rocked both of their worlds to the core in very different ways.
Mhm.
So yeah, just to have that moment with them, it did not take for granted.
Yeah. Yeah. It, so and now it's like it's 10 years later. I think we're on a 10-year anniversary, right? Um, if you had one wish from God or whoever you see as a higher power, what would it be
Oh my goodness.
today?
Well, of course, the first one that comes to mind is you wish this accident never happened, but then we've just told you all the good things that have come from it.
Oh
So
my
I'm not,
goodness. True, so true, so true.
I know, right? Um,
But let me pause you there. Let's not be so hallmark here.
yeah.
If that was your wish and you did want your son, you did see that your son was going to be this, this rising athlete or this doctor or this biochemist, like, would that be your wish?
I mean, we've talked about this.
You're
Phil
allowed,
and
you're allowed to
I've
still
talked
want
about this,
what
and of
you
course,
thought you
I raised my
wanted.
hand. Yeah, I raise my hand and say, I wish this accident never happened. I absolutely wish that. Connor, as sure as he is, says he would never wish for that. That he's in a better place now than he was before. I think spiritually, he thinks that. But yeah, of course. I mean, it's hell, and it's been
Mhm.
a long 10 years, and lots of things are different because of it. And we can always find the good, but yeah.
Yeah, I look, I have to honor you for really being, brutally honest about it. Like, I was a domestic violence survivor, right? I ran for my life, and I started to like speak out to people that would say, well, if that didn't happen, if that didn't happen, then, you wouldn't have your son. And I'm like, that's a bunch of bullshit. If that didn't happen, God would have found someone else for me to have a son just like him. Like, I was getting angry that people were like,
True.
so I get it. We're allowed to say, you know what, this really sucked. Like that
Mhm.
I had to go through that. for me, I'm like, this really sucked that my son had to go through that, like twice. Like, would I want to take it back? Yeah, of course. Did it get me to where I am today? Yes, of course. We know that. Thank God.
Yeah.
But there's always that human condition that says, wow, you know,
Mhm.
um, and then there is that human condition uh, where let's say Conor is at, where no, this is exactly so. I honor both because I'm very much everything is about now. And spiritually speaking, and I had this conversation a little bit with Conor. I don't believe that the spirit ever dies. And
Mhm.
I had asked him a question when he was in his coma. Did he have any memory of any, conscious memory,
Mhm.
spiritually conscious memory, not what we think is physically conscious,
Right.
right? And so, having said that, in this moment right now, what can you really say in your heart of hearts is your biggest blessing, biggest three blessings today?
Oh gosh, you sound like my mom. She used to ask me these questions all the time. Um,
In order of significance or depth.
well, absolutely my family.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, absolutely. Our family unit is strong. Our family unit enjoys being together. We laugh together. So that's my complete number one blessing. Um, I would also say the ability to be a seeker and
Mhm.
begin again and find a way continues to be a blessing that I feel very strongly about and very
Mhm.
proud that that's part of my makeup and my thread. Um, and I think the other blessing is for the first time in 10 years, maybe we're getting back to a little bit of a normal life, like where we should be. Connor's living on his own, and I
Mhm.
wouldn't call us empty nesters yet, but
Mhm.
yeah.
While you're
And that's
speaking, I
Charlie.
want to
That's Bridget's husband, Charlie, who is one of my favorite people in the whole planet. So
oh,
my daughter
yeah.
picked a beautiful man.
Oh, that's wonderful. While Kathleen is speaking, what I did was I put up a visual for those of you that are on audio of the family today. So there's Phil and Kathleen and Connor, assuming that's Jack, Bridget, and Bridget's husband.
Yeah,
So he's the addition to the family.
yeah.
And
And
so that's the family unit you're talking about. That's one of the three, the trilogy of blessings right there.
completely,
Awesome.
completely.
What's the third blessing?
Um, the third blessing would be just, yeah, getting back to some semblance of some normal life. Our ability that Phil and I can travel, that we can laugh, the joy that we have found again, in just moving through life. There was a time that I didn't think I would be able to go to the grocery store, or
Oh,
you know I mean, it was so limited, or take a walk, and I could do those things now, and Connor's fine. And, so it's finding the life again that, you know, put on pause for a while, but we have it again.
yeah,
So, yeah.
wonderful. Uh, Phil, I want to ask you a question. Um, Kathleen speaks about normalcy, right? Getting back to normal. What's the difference between normal before the accident and normal today, 10 years after his recovery?
Um, It's a good question. It's interesting because, as a parent, you're always thinking about your kids and what was going on with them, right? And at the time of the accident, they were all, they were getting older. Bridget was in college, a senior in college, and Connor was in his freshman year, and Jack was in high school. So they were kind of getting to that point of independence where we didn't have to think as much about what was going on with them, and in any way providing help or support. But I do think today normal, it's great because everybody is able to do more on their own. um but I do think a little bit for our normal, we are always thinking about Connor,
Hmm.
and what's going on with him, and
Hmm.
um what does his week look like, and he's working and living on his own, and just those kinds of things. So our normal has become, yes, we're doing more on our own, but we still think about Connor, right, and
Yeah.
what's going on with him. And so um, that is still there,
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
us as part of our normal, for today. A lot better than it was 10 years ago in rehab.
Yes. Yeah.
um, but it's still an element, and I think we've kind of learned, actually, you never let go of your kids, right? You're always thinking about them and worried about them and supporting them, and um,
I
you
couldn't
know
agree more. I
your
couldn't agree
parents are
more.
doing
I just met your son, and already when we had a conversation toward the end of the podcast, toward the end of the conversation, um, I don't remember if it was after we stopped the recording and we were just talking, or if it was during the recording. I got to go back now and see, but um, eh, even my head kicked into like parent mode. And
that.
and what I mean by that is, Connor says that, he's on medication for seizures and he's had a few.
Yeah.
Um, for me, as a mother of a son, um, and he was attached like Velcro to me. Kathleen, I nursed him for a year, me for like 12 months, 12 and a half, almost 13 months, just to give you some perspective. But like, I couldn't imagine. So now that's, I imagine that, Phil, that's kind of a new normal. Like, you have in the back of your head, you can't ignore the pink elephant in the room that, okay, I want to make sure that, I don't ever get that call, or, while I'm home or while he's at work, that he has a seizure, or anything like that. Does that cross your mind sometimes?
Yeah. Yeah, I think we all say when the phone rings, immediately you kind of get nervous
Oh
or
my
scared.
God. Oh,
When
goodness
a
gracious.
Kathy or kids call or something, you almost want to say, "What's wrong?" Right? Is the
Yeah.
first response. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I mean, it does just kind of stay with you. But the nice thing is, really, most of those calls are they're good. They're
Oh,
positive. Positive
thank
things are
goodness.
happening.
Thank,
Yeah, for
thank
everybody.
goodness.
So
And
it's a good thing.
yeah, it is a good thing. What would you, Phil, what would you like to say to the fathers in our audience today?
Um, I think the thing to me is, you know, um, that's a good question. I guess, what, don't be
Take your
afraid
time.
to try new things. Don't be afraid to go out of your way, to support your family. Right. I think, as Kathy talked about, we did a lot of non-traditional rehabilitation things. Um, some were pretty crazy. And but honestly, a majority of them made a difference in his recovery. And I think if we just stuck to the normal, Connor would be nowhere near where he is today. So I think, my message is you just got to keep searching and trying, and don't give up. Don't give up on your kids, right? There's always something out there that can help them. And it's just a matter of finding it. So I think just don't give up, maybe, is my message on your
I
kids.
that's a beautiful message. And I actually, I work with uh, doctor slash scientist slash medical pioneer who, the things that he works on, you would be amazed. In fact, we'll have to talk after. I want to connect it with him. And um, that's he sees that also from a scientific and spiritual viewpoint as well. That the things that the things that really can be, you would be amazed how we can not anti-age, but age reverse, not make brain injury, um, um, what's the word I'm looking for, manageable, but actually reverse it, rebuild it. Like it's not just some pie in the sky wish, but I firmly believe that this is, thankfully, the way we're going, headed in that direction with the right medical pioneers being supported, in the world.
Right. Yeah, I do think, one of the things we were lucky with Connor, um, is his injury occurred at a time when there was a lot of growth in brain injury recovery.
Mm-hmm.
And the old thoughts that whatever damage was there is there, it's never going to get better. The whole idea of rewiring the brain is, just it's taking off. And I think people are realizing the power of the brain and what it can be. And, you asked Kathy her wishes. My wish is I just wish that there continues to be great progress and Connor can take advantage of these great things that can help make him even better than he is today.
I'm going to
Because
support you in that wish.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
I really
Uh,
I think it's gonna happen, and we're on the cusp of people maybe like who you work with, who are
yes.
trying new things and willing to go outside the norm.
Making
Uh,
leaps and bounds. In fact, I want you to, when you have time, you and Kathleen, and Connor, I want you to, and the kids, I'd like you to listen to my podcast with Dr. Todd Ovakadis. Um, which, by the way, I'm on his programs. I take a slew of brain health supplements. It's a lifestyle for me. And I was telling Connor a little bit, just a little bit. I said, nothing in comparison to your traumatic brain injury, but I suffered TBI, from a broken neck and a blow to my head and whatnot. And um, so we had a little discussion about that. But I work with Dr. Todd Ovakadis, and um, again, I'm so grateful that there are these other resources and ways to really heal. And yeah, you know what? The medical industry and insurance industry, they cover nothing.
right.
And that's the very sad part of our reality here. It is. It is. And I hate to sound negative, but it's the reality. That's where we are now. We're at ground zero as far as that goes. We're also
Right.
out ground zero as far as the judicial system. As much as all of these advocates around the world are fighting the cause against this, and they're fighting the cause against that. I'm going back to what Kathleen said even an hour and a half ago, saying, we didn't want to even talk to Connor about or discuss, the person that hit him and the whole idea of a drunken driver. And I have to commend you both for that, because it's going to get you nowhere. And two words come to mind: So what? Because that's not growing you spiritually, that's not growing you, that's not helping your son grow, and that's not healing you, and that's not healing your son. But what is healing you and what is growing you is really connecting with medical professionals, like people like Dr. Todd Ovakaitis, like the one that does Conor's eye therapy, like the one that does Conor's occupational therapy, like the people that do Conor's the functional chiropractor, and so on and so forth. And so we have to, there comes a time where you and I and everyone listening to this podcast have to come to terms with being responsible for how you're going to move the needle for good, being responsible for how you're going to not necessarily change the world or make someone pay for something or bring justice to something, but how you're going to take responsibility for leveraging the life situation and bringing you beyond a place and a space where you can really thrive, not just deal, not just cope, but thrive. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. It makes a lot of sense, because I think that's what we've been frustrated by is, if you think about it, if we just stopped where the traditional therapy was, Connor would probably be on some kind of disability, some kind of government assistance, and all those kinds of things. But, here he is holding a job and living on his own,
Unbelievable.
doesn't need somebody to live with him or anything like that. And, you just think about what it would mean, how many other people are out there that they could have a better life, they could contribute to society, and to the world, if we just gave them that extra attention.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
that's just really an important thing that I think, the insurance and healthcare and stuff is not really focused in on that. They don't think about that. Um,
Well, they don't
because
make
a
money on
brain
thinking
injury is
about
like a
that.
broken leg. It's not going to heal quickly. And so we just need people to, if you grasp that, I think you'll understand the benefits it could mean if we invest in these kind of therapies and recovery for these people.
Absolutely. Thank you, Phil. Kathleen, I want to ask you, do you have a message that you would like to share with any wives in our audience that um, are going through adversity with their children as a
Um,
wife?
as a wife,
Yeah.
another great question. I think it was so great with Phil and I that I knew Phil was he had to take care of things. Phil did everything else that needed to be handled, and I could focus on Connor and helping to move him forward and connections with this therapist. My advice for wives would be, you're stronger than you know. You can do this. And I think your husband should compliment you in doing it, that you complement each other. And also be patient with the man's way of emotion. It's not the same.
Not the same as a
And
woman's.
no, yes, right. And in crisis time, your default mode kicks in for both of you, and some patience with that. And hopefully your husband has patience with you too. I mean, it goes both ways. So, yeah, I mean, ask a lot of your relationship, but with grace and with patience and with kindness.
Mm, I love that, Kathleen. And it's interesting because a part of me feels like you also need to let go and just let him do what he's doing while you need to do what you're doing. And that's coming from someone who, I was a single mom for a long time. So I wound up kind of wearing like the two set of pants, if you will, and always making those decisions on my own and kind of having like being masculine when I needed to be, feminine when I needed to be. And the point is like, if I were in that situation, let's say now, right, with my significant other, and my son's 25 going on 26, if something, tragic were to happen and I needed to focus 1000% now on, let's say, my son, there would have to be an element of me just letting go of trying to do all the logistics and just letting him, take care of everything. Is that kind of also ringing true with you? Like maybe part of the advice or no?
Absolutely. There needs to be mutual respect that what Phil is handling and what he's managing and what I'm handling and what I'm managing, that I completely trust the decisions you're making, what you think, how, you want it to go. And, you need to really honestly trust how I'm talking to the doctors or, what it just a complete mutual respect for each other.
A
And Phil
mutual
did say,
respect and trusting in your roles, trusting in each other's roles.
yeah, because we had one goal. We had one goal, and that was to move Conor forward and make sure
That's
he,
almost that's almost a third thing, like, and have that one common goal.
yeah, yeah.
I love that. I love that. I would really like to thank the two of you for being here and sharing everything. I do want to ask you, Kathleen, there's one question I wanted to ask you, and I might circle back with Phil as well. Um, so it's my understanding from the blurb on Connor's website and your sister writing the book. It's my understanding that so you had you had a significant loss or losses in your family growing up.
Mhm.
Um, and so fast forward, then all of a sudden there's this, now you have your new family,
Mhm.
right, with Phil and the children. And then suddenly this happens with your middle child, with Conor.
Mhm.
What did any of that, if at all, did that trigger anything from your past losses and grief?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Triggered it all. Um, I had a lot of practice
Mhm.
and loss and
Imagine that. I just want everyone to hear what she just said. I've had a lot of practice in loss.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's like parallels with me saying I had a lot of practice with abuse.
Yeah.
As sad as that sounds, right? And I've had loss, but I want to I want to kind of highlight what you just said. It's interesting that you called it practice. Does that mean that's kind of telling me that by the time you got to Conor, you weren't having it?
uh nobody has said that to me or thought of that, but
I'm
that
pretty,
was
I'm
my,
pretty, I'm pretty in tuned.
yes, you are. And that was my approach. I am not having it. This is not going to happen again. We are gonna walk through this, but we're gonna get to the other side. And yeah, and it in my family it was from a very early age. So it yeah, to me it really was practice. I wasn't,
You never saw it like that before.
yeah,
But I'm hearing but you innately use that word practice. And
yeah.
so don't you feel now that we're speaking on this level, do you feel in a sense that those things happened to prepare you for Conor's
I
event.
have never taken it that far either, but I absolutely, I would agree with that. Absolutely.
Phil, did anything happen in your past as it comes to maybe taking care of something or trying to take care of something and it didn't work out?
Um, I would have to say no.
Okay.
I had a pretty fortunate life. Um, you know, having grandparents pass away and things like that. But that's, you know, to me, that's kind of normal course of life.
Mhm.
Um,
So
I look
having
at,
no adversity like outside the norm in your
right,
past.
yeah. And Kathy's family is, there's been a lot. There's been a
Right.
lot of challenges, and
Mm-hmm.
she's, um, I think, you know, she was saying, I mean, it's, it helps build up your ability to deal with stress
Mm-hmm.
and very stressful situation when you've been through it before, right? So that's, you know, maybe in the like we talked about in the beginning, I was more on the fear side, um, because I wasn't used to this. I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't didn't I don't know if you ever get used to your child being injured so badly, but um, I don't know. I was coming from a different perspective, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
And so
So
your perspective and your upbringing, um, there was really no history, or should I say experience, for you to pull from. So now here you are all these years later, you have your own family,
yeah,
and not even to speak of what Kathy went through, but like you personally in your family growing up, you really didn't have that adversity. So even with Kathleen's family, and I mean this, I want to say this sensitively, um, it's still someone else's story. It wasn't yours. And so having said that, since you didn't have a personal story and a personal experience with that, how important was it for you to make sure that everything was going to be okay?
yeah. I think once again, once I was able to kind of get my head around it, I think it was very important to me that this was not going to be a tragic end. This was not going to be another um, thing that we would um, think
Yeah,
about we wish something had been different, right? So it was very important to me that we were going to charge ahead, and this was going to be um, something we would all be very proud of, celebrate, and it would, in the end, be a joyful moment versus a sad recollection, right?
and you certainly did
Um,
that. And so what are you
yeah.
celebrating today?
Um, you know, honestly, really our family, really having a family. We have two grandchildren now, and
Oh,
just even seeing our grandson, who is 3 today, um,
oh,
just
happy
seeing
birthday.
how excited, yeah, just seeing him get so excited to see Connor, and just to think about, gosh, that was so close to not happening. That was
Yes,
close that he would never know Connor. And it's just fun to see that. And it just makes me really happy. And so really for me, celebrating our family, um, is really the best to me.
I
It's
love
really,
that. Thank you for sharing that. I really want to honor you both here, and it just it warms my heart to really be able to talk to the two of you and really underscore how much family matters, how much working together as a unit matters, how much love matters. Yeah, but sometimes we look at that and it's so Hallmark and no one really understands, the love is there. The essence of love is there, but we have to do the work. We have to pull together, like Kathleen said. We have to respect each other. Like Phil said, we do have to compartmentalize while we're going through an adverse situation so that things can logistically be taken care of. But at the end of the day, it's all about family. And I feel like and it's all about really trusting and making things happen that is not the belief system, so to speak, of the normalcy that the doctors propose or diagnose or prognose, but you're really going beyond in a way that is so much bigger than anyone can ever imagine. And I want to thank you both for being here. And really, it speaks to the essence of this show, right? Beyond the current situation. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you
Thank
for
you.
having us.
Bye.
Bye-bye.